NBC senior Capitol Hill correspondent Garrett Haake. Also with us, former federal prosecutor Sean Wu and Beisel Smikle. He's a Democratic strategist, the former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. Welcome all. So, Garrett, what is the latest this hour about those tax returns? When are we going to see them? We know that it was a party line vote last night and that they are taking out Social Security numbers and other highly personal data, but we're going to see them today, tomorrow, in the next couple of days?
Well, Andrea, it sounds like tomorrow. I was just checking my phone. Our House producer colleague Haley Talbot just caught up with Chairman Neal in the hallway outside his office, and he indicated that he thinks this can all be wrapped up as early as tomorrow in terms of getting the details of the tax returns public. You said it right now. We've got Ways and Means staffers doing the somewhat menial work of going through and scrubbing these documents to remove the remaining highly personal data, Social Security numbers, what have you. But once that process is concluded, those returns will be entered into the congressional record and then made public. And again, according to the chairman just a moment ago, that should happen tomorrow.
And Sean Wu, as a former federal prosecutor and as a as a white-collar defense attorney, what is the first thing you want to look for? What do you want to see in the president's taxes when they become public?
Well, Andrea, I don't think there's likely to be any new evidence for prosecutors necessarily because federal and state prosecutors could have had access to this before the public does. What I'd be looking for in particular is the charities issue. I mean, he's a big braggart about contributing to charities, and I'd be interested to see whether that is actually being done when he claims those exemptions. Also, it'd be interesting to see what sorts of business dealings he's having with foreign entities, what kind of declarations there are for foreign taxes on that front. I do think also as a prosecutor, slightly separately, I think it's very troubling that the IRS didn't do those audits, and I think there's room for some investigation there as well, Andrea.
And Beisel, what does this mean when the American public sees these tax returns for the first time? Do you think it will have a political impact on Donald Trump's image? He's always talked about how successful he is, and it shows wild swings in his fortunes, as well as the fact that he didn't pay any taxes at all in 2020. I don't think there are very many Americans who could say that.
That's true. I think the reverberations are different now than they were, say, in 2016 when he bragged about not paying taxes or paying very little in taxes. I remember that debate with Hillary Clinton where she brought that issue to the forefront, and he said, well, that shows how smart I am. I think a lot of voters supported him for that reason, because they felt here's a guy who could outsmart the system. You know, that feels very differently. That lands very differently now in 2022 when we really understand the fullness of Donald Trump and all that he's wrought on this country. I think the point about the foreign dealings is very important. We know that even folks who've run for office under the sort of MAGA heading have questionable dealings as well. Here in New York, George Santos ran and won after having accepted money from someone tied to a Russian oligarch. So I think we now understand how all of these dealings have impacted the country, impacted the American resident and citizen, the troubles that it's caused for our institutions. And I think they hit very differently with the voters.
And Sham, what do you make of Charles Reddick? He was Trump's appointee to lead the IRS, of questionable credentials, frankly, and saying they were, quote, simply outgunned and lacked the specialists needed to assess Trump's filings. But I mean, you are assigned by mandate to audit the president and the vice president every year, ever since Richard Nixon. And it's been done for every president since 1977. And then we learned that what he turned over actually in supporting detail was basically 1.5 banker's boxes or something, very little, and no supporting material for all of those cash charitable contributions.
Yes, that's such a good point, Andrea. I mean, this arose from the Nixon era, and it's meant really precisely for this type of president to give better transparency and oversight from Congress. I think that the Inspector General for IRS should look into this. And arguably DOJ's tax division doesn't have to be a criminal investigation. Their civil division can also look at this to find out what went wrong there, because this is a critical part of their job. And the idea that the IRS is outgunned, I'm sure most American citizens would be quite surprised to hear that response from them. And then, of course, as you point out, it turns out to be only one banker's box. Really does not add up. So I think that should be looked at.
Garrett, I'm really fascinated by Richard Neal, the Ways and Means chairman, because, he was refusing all interviews, and then last night spoke, on camera very briefly on what they had found so far. But he basically explained why he doesn't do interviews, that when he took that job, he consulted lawyers and wanted to make sure he had no conflicts of interest. He really takes his job seriously in a way that a lot of people do not expect from congressional chairmen because of the politics and the motivation to be out there all the time. Talk to me about him.
Yeah, Andrea, and look, this is a grown-up committee. I mean, Ways and Means is one of the most powerful committees in either chamber in Congress, the Tax Writing Committee. Chairman Neal, close to Speaker Pelosi, she has really been lavishing praise on him and how he has handled this. And he was beaten up a little bit on the left for not being perceived to have not been aggressive enough on this Trump taxes issue in the last couple of years, but he stayed with it. He stayed cautious throughout. The last couple of days, all my interactions with him have been almost comical. He's so careful in what he's willing to say. He's got a staffer or a lawyer with him just about all the time. As I mentioned, our colleague who caught up with him in the hallway just a moment ago said he seemed noticeably relieved to have this kind of no longer hanging over his head. But he told me in the days and weeks since that Supreme Court ruling that he was going to see this through and that he was committed to seeing this through and has now done so. A great deal of experience on really in both parties. Again, this is a panel for grown-ups, frankly, in both parties, and that's how this issue was handled, including that executive session last night, largely behind closed doors, and the back and forth that he had with Kevin Brady, the retiring now ranking Republican member. The two of them have worked together fairly well for quite a long time.
And does this committee membership go out of business? I assume it does on January 3rd. What is the makeup of the new committee when the Republicans take over?
Well, the chairmanship is an open question, Andrea. This is actually one of the more interesting open questions in the new Congress. You've got potential McCarthy allies here. It's one of those things that's not going to be settled until after the speakership issue is settled. So mark this space. You could be seeing some pretty interesting backroom operations on who's going to be the next Ways and Means Committee chairman on the Republican side.
Yeah, you think? I would bet on that, Garrett. Thanks very much to you and Sham Wu and Basil Smikle. Thanks again.